Okay, so the debate between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. The Federalists favored a stronger federal government, and the Anti-Federalists were concerned about a central government that was too strong, and so they favored more the protection of more state sovereignty. So this is the debate that I think you're very familiar with from your U.S. history course. And I want to emphasize that this is a debate from the beginning that continues today. This tension between having two levels of government, the federal government and the state government. So it was essentially, the issue was national versus state power. And then how to structure a government that would give both governments enough power. And ultimately, when we limit any government, it protects individual rights and individual liberties. So what I want to show you is our options. The options to structure a government that has two levels or multiple levels. And you should copy down this chart. Instead of giving you a definition for these terms, these three terms, unitary system, federation, confederation, I'd rather you have the picture. So pause this while you copy it, and then resume and I'll explain. Okay, so we have three options here. In a unitary system, you'll notice you have the voters here, an arrow going up to a central government, and then one up to the state and local government. So at first you might see this structure and assume it's the state and the local governments that are strongest or supreme. But let's take a closer look. You'll see that the voters get to elect people to the central government. So they're represented in the central government. And the central government, with its power, establishes the states and the local governments and may appoint the officials in that government. So to oversimplify it, this would be like we go out and vote for the president of the United States, so people across the country vote for the president, and then that president could appoint every state's governor. That would be a unitary system. So in this unitary system, which government is strongest? The central government or the local government? In this case, it would be the central government. And by the way, central, federal, national, all synonymous in this case. Okay? So in a unitary system, Anti-Federalists were concerned about a unitary system where essentially the local governments are deriving their authority from the central governments. And then here on the right, a confederation. We know that the Articles of Confederation was a confederation. Here you have voters that can elect people to their local government, their state government, and then those officials, those governments, would vote or somehow choose the officials in the central government. In this case, which government has the most power or is supreme? In this case, it would be the state and local governments. It's the central government deriving its power from those local governments. So the question was how to balance it, and this middle one is really what they came up with. That we could have voters live under two governments simultaneously where neither government derives its power from the other. So here the voters can participate in elections to elect folks to the central government and at the same time to their local governments. And both those governments make laws that apply to the voters. So this seems like a really good compromise. It's kind of the middle ground. But what it does allow for is a whole lot of confusion and ambiguity. Which government feels strongest to you? It varies. It varies depending on topic. So most people tend to think the federal government is the strongest government because they're most familiar with what the federal government is doing. But what note I'd like you to make here for next to the state and local government is 95% of the law you live under is state law. So the fact that only 5% of the law you follow is federal law means that you might feel the state law affects you much, much more than the federal government. Okay, so the next slide, we're going to go into what the document says, where in the Constitution we see this agreement between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So I would make like a T-chart here, and what I'm going to go through is I'm going to have you go to places in the Constitution, I'll describe them, tell you what you should add into the Constitution. And then on the left, I'll put the wins for the Federalists. You'll see pop up what they got in the agreement. And then corresponding next to it will be the wins for the Anti-Federalists. So the Federalists want a stronger national government. The Anti-Federalists want to protect state sovereignty. The first thing we need to address, though, is how under the Articles of Confederation, the Congress couldn't do basic things that all governments throughout the world do, like collect taxes and raise an army. So if you think about the numerous weaknesses in the Articles, particularly those regarding the economy, those get immediately fixed with Article 1, Section 8. So open up to Article 1, Section 8. It's by far the most important article section that we'll go to numerous times this school year. So Article 1, Section 8 is also known as the enumerated powers. You can write it next to Section 8. And I'd like you to read through that, pause that, and read through that. Not the whole thing. Kind of skim it and go all the way down to the bottom of the page. That should be enough. So you're pausing and reading. Okay, so this is, if you didn't pick up on it, is a list of powers that Congress has. There's definitely a win for the Federalists, because Congress is the legislative body for the federal government. So this is a list of congressional powers. You should number the paragraphs because I'll reference various clauses within. So the very first power, the most important one, the Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes. That's paragraph 1, so put a 1 next to it. Paragraph 2 is to borrow money. Paragraph 3, to regulate commerce. Every paragraph starts with a 2 because it's continuing off of that first line, the Congress shall have the power to. That's a win for the Federalists. So what do the Federalists want? They want to make sure that the federal government can't do too much. So that brings in Article 1, Section 9, the denied powers. So after Article 1, Section 8 is Section 9. And Section 9 essentially lists the things that the Congress cannot do. So next to Section 9, you write the denied powers. Okay. And when we limit the government in this document, the government is limited for the purpose of protecting individual rights. And there are 3 rights that are so fundamental to the framers that they are protected in the original document in the very first article of the document. They are not left in the Bill of Rights. They're immediately protected. And so those start at the second paragraph of Article 1, Section 9. You have 3 denied powers that secure individual rights. So important they're right here, and I'd like you to underline them. First, underline habeas corpus. I'll go over that in a second. Then underline bill of attainder. That's in the third paragraph. And also in that third clause, underline no ex post facto laws. Okay. So these protect individuals' rights from a federal government. Let me explain first habeas corpus. Habeas corpus refers to your right to be brought before a judge and told why you're being imprisoned. So if you're imprisoned, you have a right to know why. And here it is saying that Congress cannot suspend habeas corpus. The second individual right that's so fundamental is your right to not be imprisoned by the government without, due process, without a trial. So where it here says no bill of attainder, it's talking about how Congress can't make a bill, can't make a law that actually imprisons somebody. So we tend to think of if someone goes to prison, it's because they have gone through the judicial branch. They've had their trial, there was a judge or jury who made a decision, and then they are convicted, and everything happened fair and square according to due process. But if you could imagine a situation where Congress passes a bill that says someone will be imprisoned, it automatically skips the judicial branch and sends them to prison. That's what is being dealt with here. So that one's the hardest for my students to imagine because it's hard to imagine in what instance a government would imprison people by law without having committed a crime. Has that happened in American history? No, not exactly. I guess the closest thing to it would be Japanese internment. So Congress passed legislation that did send Japanese Americans into internment camps. It's not exactly imprisonment, but it's darn close there. And then finally, no ex post facto laws. So that means after the fact. Here's the idea that Congress can't make a law and then retroactively apply it to you. So let's say someone comes into my classroom with McDonald's for breakfast, and I don't really like McDonald's, so I notice it. And the following class period, there's a big sign posted that says, no McDonald's or it's an automatic referral. Well, if that morning no one walks in with McDonald's, you would think it'd be okay, but I might remember last week John Smith was eating McDonald's and I would like him to be punished for breaking that law. That is not allowed. So no ex post facto laws means no laws can be passed so as to retroactively punish. So these are 3 individual liberties so important that the Anti-Federalists said it has to be in the original document, Article 1, and those rights are so important, but you derive your rights by limiting the government. So it's in the denied powers. Okay. Next, go to Article 6, Paragraph 2. And this is the Supremacy Clause. Read through it and pause it. Now that you've read it, what is supreme? Here it is saying that the Constitution and all federal laws are supreme over state constitutions and state laws. So write Supremacy Clause next to Article 6. Okay, that's where we'll find it. But here, to clarify, it's when the 2 laws conflict that the federal law will trump state law. All right, so the Supremacy Clause seems like quite a big win for the Federalists. It says when 2 sets of laws conflict, federal law wins. But it's the states still have a really big sphere of influence, or sphere of powers, I should say, sphere of powers, in which you wouldn't see conflicting laws. So we got the Supremacy Clause. Federal law trumps state law. If the 2 conflict, federal law reigns supreme. And the Supreme Court has reaffirmed that a number of times. Okay, and it really reaffirms that in McCulloch v. Maryland of 1819, but we'll cover that later. Okay, the 10th Amendment. Flip to the 10th. This one has 2 names, so you should write them next to the 10th Amendment. Amendment X, it's in Roman numerals, right, reserved powers, and states' rights amendment. So read through it, pause it. Okay. The 10th Amendment here doesn't seem to say much. It's really short. There's no specific power given to the states, and that's just the point. There is no specific one given because so many powers are potentially state powers. I'll translate it. The word delegated essentially means given. So powers not given to the U.S. by the Constitution. Where do we see the list of powers given to the federal government? That would be in Article 1, Section 8. So here it's saying, if powers aren't listed in the enumerated powers, if they're not listed in powers given to the United States by the Constitution, and if they're not also prohibited by the Constitution, there's a section, Article 1, Section 10, that goes through what states can't do, things like coining money or signing treaties or entering into war. Then it's left to the states. So for example, in this document you see nothing about education or marriage or driver's licenses. So those things are reserved to the states. The list is potentially infinite. So next to the 10th Amendment, states' rights and reserved powers. So when we look at the Supremacy Clause and the 10th Amendment side by side, they both give incredible power to the federal government and the state government. And there can be some confusion about what would be a reserved power. And that's really what politics these days is about. So when we think about something like legalization, it comes down to whether or not federal law applies or state law. Okay, you're gonna go to the next recording now.